Everybody. Thanks for joining us again. Welcome back. This is our third installment of our book study around Clay's quilt. Very excited that this is our final kind of discussion about the overall book together as a team. And then next week, we will be joined by the author of the book, Silas House, who will be here to answer questions and kind of guide us through some more discussions. So I hope that as we're having these conversations about the book, that you all are taking notes as well and thinking about what you want to talk about with Silas next week. So we're really excited about that. That is kind of our culminating part of this study, is to really get some in-depth conversations with Silas about kind of what's going on in the book, what are we missing, what his thoughts are on some of our questions. And so I know that as we've been doing this, you all have been asking questions and writing down questions that you have for him. And so I hope that you'll continue to do that. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of time today built into this conversation time to also think about some additional questions we might have when we come back together for our final meeting, which will be next Thursday at 10 a.m. We've gotten some really good feedback about this, so I hope that you all have enjoyed it. And we will be looking for other opportunities for us to have conversations like this around some themes. Hopefully, I won't be the person leading that. Hopefully, you'll have some good content experts who will be leading those conversations, but I'm doing my best. So we'll see how this goes. I also would, as you're reading Clay's Quilt and you're thinking about this, there are two other books in the trilogy. He has kind of an Appalachian trilogy that he has written that involves all of the same characters. It is at the same timeline, but it's from different perspectives and about different things. So some of them are about Easter in particular, one of them, and some other things. So that is The Coal Tattoo and A Parchment of Leaves. Both of those are in the trilogy that he wrote around the same time, related to this same kind of experience. So you all might want to check those out as well as you're thinking about what to do next. So that's kind of where we are. Welcome back. I'm glad you all are here. So let's see what we can do. All right, so let's see. I think Angie Austin is getting those, so that's exciting. You guys check those out, but hopefully they'll be just as good as this one, because I've really enjoyed it so far. So let's get into kind of our conversation this morning, and we'll see how we're going. One, I guess I'll start with, what do y'all want to talk about? Is there anything burning related to this? I'll start there. I have a list of things that I'll get into, but I don't want to cut anybody short. What are you guys thinking so far? Where do you want to go with this? Anybody want to jump in?
I just want to know what happened between Cake and Dreama. I mean, I've always loved you, and then you never hear anything else.
That's life, honey.
And are they related? Are they related? That was another question.
They are not related, right?
I don't know.
I thought so.
No. They're not related.
Okay.
Right. Anybody else think they're related? Because Cake's mother is the lady that moved from Florida, right? And so,
Marguerite, right?
Sorry?
Is it Marguerite?
Marguerite
Yeah.
moved from Florida. Now, I don't know if the husband is related in the family line. There is, Katie, you're my expert on the family tree, because Katie has been studying this family tree in the front of the book. I know you guys have seen it. This is the most disturbing family tree I think that we've seen in a while. So there's lots of questions that have emerged from the family tree in the front in our office discussions. So you might want to look there. I don't think they are related. They're not anywhere on this family tree. No. Thank goodness, because he clearly is in love with her and has been his whole life, and she does not care about him.
goes to jail defending her, basically standing up for her, and then you don't hear anything.
He gave it his best shot, but it just didn't seem like it was going anywhere there. And she very quickly moved on after he confessed his love to her and never mentioned it again. Guys, that's real life. That's how it works in the real world.
I think how it works in the real world is, she, in the background that you never hear of, behind the scenes, she just went ahead and said fine and married him, whether she really wanted to or not. And they lived the rest of their lives in relative contentment.
Well, I'll tell you, if anybody has read the other two books in the trilogy, maybe it goes into more detail in those two books.
I looked on Amazon. I think one of them is set when Easter and Annette are younger. So that would be beforehand. And I don't know about the other one.
Well, there we go. David Sullivan, and you've studied this for a while. You've used this book. What are your insights on the Kate Dreama relationship there?
Yeah, I'm hoping against hope there's no relations. I want to hope that there's nothing. I haven't found anything that says they are. So I'm being the optimist on this one.
Well, let's go with it. Although I will say that they live in the same holler. And if you look at kind of the history of their family, the whole family lives in the same holler together pretty much. So you have to wonder, how did this guy move into the holler with everybody else if he's not related? Like, that's unusual. And then he brought his wife back from Florida. So, I mean, there may be some distant relationship there. Good point, Justin. Thanks for bringing up our taboo relationship in the book.
Well, I felt like we were just on an episode of Jerry Springer just then. He is the father. No, sorry.
All right. Anybody else have any other big glaring issues you want to talk about before we get into some more specifics?
I thought the ending was interesting because I thought the author did a very good job. We are safe to talk about the ending, right?
Yeah, I think everybody is through the book now. So we're all the way through.
Well, I didn't know whether to be happy or sad because there was this positive thing, a pregnancy, and everybody's happy and they have the celebration. But at the same time, it was kind of a sad ending because Clay was about to break this cycle. He was on the beach having this epiphany of it's okay to not be at that place and I don't have to be there to be happy. And then it's like he's starting to realize some things while they're on the beach. And then he finds out that she's pregnant and they rush back home and it starts the cycle all over again.
Yeah, it is a very complicated ending. I think that's one of the things that Silas talks about when he talks about the books is he tries to really illustrate the complexity of people and their relationships and kind of how things play out. It was I think a very sad ending it was very sad for me. It wasn't a happy ending in that it kind of, there's this great new life. I mean, you have the death of his great uncle Paul, the delivery of the quilt, that the whole book is Clay's quilt. We have the quilt emerging throughout, and then finally delivered with the breakdown right at the end. I was a puddle at the end. So, I mean, I was, but you all know already, I've already shared with you, I've cried at every chapter. So this is not a surprise for me that I cried at the end too. But it was, it was an interesting ending related to that. One of the things we talked about, and I'm kind of interested in your all's thoughts on this, is at the very end, he took his new daughter up into the woods, which is, it's kind of very reflective back on his childhood and his memories with his mom who took him up into the mountains. And then we all know that she described in very great detail in her letter about those experiences of going up into the mountain and the field of flowers and the other things that she saw and she relayed to him that he never really found. And so I'm interested, what are your all's thoughts on kind of that final of him taking his daughter up there on the top of the mountain, still that disconnect from the description of the beauty of that mountain and what he was able to find? Is anybody else missing kind of that link in there?
I just kind of equated it to is we all have memories of things as children that we remember differently than what they actually were. And as a little child, what might have been a big field of flowers looked huge, but in reality probably wasn't a great big field of flowers like he's thinking it is now. And more than likely where he's at is the exact same spot that his mama brought him. And I think memory over time, we distort things and change things up to where we think it's one way, and in reality, it's not necessarily totally different, but a little enough different that we don't recognize it for what it is.
Well, and if even if it's as adults or as our students, we want to hold on to the good things. We want to remember it as something that was that made us feel good and think about the good parts of things. And I think our students, you know, some of the lives that they have, they hold on to the really good parts of their family. They hold on to that. And I think that's what he was doing on that mountain, to constantly say, this is the only part that I have of my mother, and I want my daughter to know her mother, my mother.
I think that we need to recognize that the culture is there, and it is the steady, you know, nature is that steady thing around us. But
Mhm.
we as people have the ability to change how we live. And if you notice, it says, you know, it might not be the same flowers that his mother stood on, but this is a different one. So he actually, he went a step further than his mother. He got across that mountain. He did get out, but he chose to come back. So you see there's an evolution. He did break that cycle. And so maybe his daughter will go even further and really get out, or even change the culture that they're living in, not to be so abusive. And you know, maybe that next generation can improve the living situation. I don't know, it, you know, maybe that, you know, even though the love of where they live stays the same, but you know, each generation can improve upon where, you know, everything is negative. I don't know how to put it.
No, I think I understand what you're saying, Heather, and that there's incremental changes that are happening. And so it's like, you know, opening the doors for change further down the road, and that you're taking steps towards some things. But I think that also for me opens up kind of this conversation as some, I think maybe some internal struggle about the sense of place, the importance of place, and that maybe I think of my own experience, and I grew up where Silas grew up in Corbin and the Lilly area. I grew up in Corbin on the other side of Corbin, more toward Williamsburg. It was in Woodbine. We call it the suburbs of Corbin, if Corbin had suburbs. And I left like when I was 17. I graduated high school when I was 17. I just, went away to college, and I never went back. And kind of, I've always had this internal struggle about what that looks like of going back home. And then my expectations for myself of feeling like I needed to escape from that. And what is it really that we're saying in our values, that you have to escape from somewhere, that you have to leave home in order to be fulfilled, or that you have to leave your sense of place? And so there's that complexity, I think, that comes into this conversation too, about, you know, the experience of going somewhere else and seeing things that are different, but then feeling that pull back home. And so that's a real struggle, I think, internally for me, that I think has also been illustrated in this book. And I think it does talk about the complexities of the sense of place that people have. And we hear that a lot in Appalachian culture and Appalachian literature, this pull back to our sense of place, of how important that is. So I'm sure that they probably were, in my head anyway, having a similar struggle about the place and what that means.
You know, Ronnie, that was my favorite part of the whole book, was when they escaped to Florida. I thought that,
Florida Beach.
yeah, the beach, right? Just to get away. And I felt like I had stayed at that motel. I felt like that I had walked that, you know, place. And when I read it the first time, I was rooting for them to stay. I wanted them to, and I don't know why, but I just wanted them. I thought, this is a fresh start. They can get away from their troubles. And I knew they weren't going to. I knew they were going back. But to me, I loved his description of the place. I felt like that I had been here. And to me, that was the one part where I felt like they just broke free of all the history and the problems and the family and all that. It was just this fresh start that I thought, I rooted for them to stay, you know, stay. Everything can start anew. But anyway, I loved it when they left. That was kind of a weird place in the book, but I felt it was great because, you know, I was rooting for them.
Yeah. It's interesting that I've read a little bit about maybe some of the kind of recovery programs and 12-step programs and those kind of things. And while I haven't been involved in that personally directly, I mean, I've read about it, and kind of one of the things that they talk about in their literature is geographic cures. That a lot of time people who are struggling with addiction issues and other things look for geographic cures to their problems, and that thinking that if I can move somewhere else, that I can start that fresh start, I can be all over. But when you do that, unless you're dealing with the underlying issues of what's happening and what has created the situation that you're in and all those things, the geographic cure doesn't address those things. It might make a temporary relief. But
Dr. That's an extremely valid point, and I've actually not in that terms, but use that with talking to kids that I just want to move and get a fresh start. And I said, let me tell you a little story. I say, me and my family, we moved around a lot when I was a kid growing up. My dad was postmaster several spots, so every few years we were moving. And I said, no matter how carefully we packed our boxes, our troubles always seem to make it to the next stop with us.
Yeah.
And that's talking about dealing with those underlying. They think just changing location is going to fix it all, and it doesn't. Unfortunately. So that's just a good point, and just reminded me of what I've used that several times with kids to show that I know what you're going through, because I've done it and been through it and understand. But just the change of scenery doesn't fix it. It's a momentary reprieve of you kind of forget what's going on until something else happens that call to come back home. Because as soon as he found out, let's go and let's go now, and stuff. It's just like when we go on vacation. As soon as it's the day to come back, we're ready to get home and stuff and get back to our routine and normal.
I wanted to mention that too. That kind of happened to me. Honestly, I was married to an alcoholic with 2 small children, and my dad was living in North Carolina by the Outer Banks. And Dad told me, put geography between you, because my ex-husband was very abusive. And I did for 2 years. I went down there and taught, and I just wasn't happy. And he got sober somewhat, and I just wanted to come home. So I had escaped. And when I read that part, I thought, oh my gosh, I totally get it. And I came home back here. And, I've asked myself that question several times. Did I do my children a disservice by bringing them back? Or should I have stayed away? I don't know. That's a good question, because there's a lot of things that could have been different for them.
And living on vacation is very different than living, so it's, sometimes we forget that too. I mean, I go to the same beach every summer. We go to to Oak Island in North Carolina every summer. We get a house there and we go, and that's kind of, I've always had this vision of, like, I want my daughter to go to the same place every summer. I want her to have like this consistent memory of, like, that's where we went, and that's kind of like our family thing. Like when I was growing up, we would occasionally go to Myrtle Beach like they did in this story. And, we would call it Redneck Riviera. We'd go down there, and we didn't stay in hotels. We camped at a camping ground on the beach. But I have those memories of going back to those same kind of places. But when I think about being there on vacation, life is very different than being there, living there, and what that would look like. I think those are some really good points.
I just got back from vacation. It's the first time I had been able to go since COVID. So we went to the same place. My mom and dad's had that house for 30 years. And it seems like I can go there. I know it's just vacation, but I can go there and I get, I don't know, the strength, or I can think things through, or the calmness that I can come back and face whatever I need to face. And this will be our 3rd generation of people going there. So we've gone there, and and it's double-sided. You get the strength from there, but you feel like you're close to your home in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So one of the things that we see through this book, and as we think about our students, and if we use this in a class context, one of the things that has been a recurring theme throughout this that we've touched on is all of the trauma that's in the book. There's lots of trauma. There's lots of things that are happening to people and that people are doing to other people. And so I think it brings up sometimes a lot of issues that folks might have related to that. And so I'm interested in hearing from those of you who are in the classroom who might use a book like this or use a document similar to this that might have some triggers for students when they see some of the things that are happening. How are you all addressing the trauma in the book to your students, and how would you pull that in? I'm interested in hearing some feedback, and then for you all to kind of have that with each other, those who have done similar studies or use similar topics.
I think it was said the other day that I teach Speak, which is a book about a girl being raped right before her freshman year of high school, and then she goes through the whole school not speaking. And that's a book that I think really relates to a lot of our kids, not that every kid has been sexually abused, but just because it really touches them that they've held something in for so long and it really kind of hurts them more in the long run. But that's something that I really let the counselors really come in and be a part of that book, just because I'm not a counselor. I don't know all the techniques that would help the kids, but I think it's just good for them to have an outlet to talk to, that it's not in the classroom in front of everybody, but it could be a one-on-one with their counselor.
Good, thanks, Amanda. Other folks, David, I know that you use this in your class. Has this issue come up, or how you guys deal with the trauma that's kind of triggered throughout this book in your classrooms? You're on mute there, bud.
Ronnie, while we're waiting for him to unmute, I think it's odd that you said, you focused on a lot of the trauma, because for me, this book's more about family than trauma. And I know trauma is happening in the background all the time and everything going on, but it's just always that sense of family and that sense of home that is the thing that always speaks to me all the way through the book, as much as the
Well, it does.
trauma.
Yeah, and we talked about that,
Yeah.
definitely the family theme is probably the strongest thing here,
Yeah.
but even weave through that when we're talking, I don't know, this is just me, but I think when we talk to our students, and if they're experiencing this book with us, that theme of family is also can be traumatic for a lot of our students who have been removed from their homes. And then that's, a second impact of trauma, not just the first experience, but then the removal and what that looks like. And so I just want us to be prepared as we have conversations, not just about the good things that are happening in the
Yeah.
book, which are easy to talk about. Those are things that are comfortable that we can talk about without kind of a fear of re-traumatizing people. And so we don't want to re-traumatize people. So
Right.
how do we go into this with open eyes about how to have those conversations?
Well, I don't know if I'm back on camera, Ronnie, but okay. I've found that this book brings out a lot of emotions from our kids, and it varies sometimes with the kid to the kid, but you will think you're going to accomplish 2 or 3 chapters for the day, and instead you get about 2 or 3 paragraphs, and it really elicits lots of conversations because, I've had some really deep conversations with some of our kids about the dysfunctional families that they'll read it and they immediately see it in their own home, or they see the alcoholism, or they see the drug abuse, or they see a lot of that, and they immediately, I think it just brings out a lot of conversations. And a lot of times I find it very positive. I don't find it, I haven't yet found it to be a problem, but I found a lot of kids, they see it and they immediately recognize it and go, I want to, let me share what's going on here. I've seen this in my house. So to me, it just brings out lots of great conversations. And in the end, the kids want to read more because they see something that they actually recognize. That's one of my big problems with a lot of literature that we read, or that people want us to read, you know, it's hard to relate some books to what these kids are going through that we have in our programs, right? And Shakespeare sometimes is hard to relate. But this book, they see every chapter, they see, you know, they see Kate, they see Dreama, they see these kids in their own house. And they may not see the mountain there, but they see everything else. So it's so relatable. The kids want to see what happens, and they, you know, they find themselves, I think, invested in the characters. At least that's been my experience.
Well, I think it lets them know everybody doesn't have a perfect house,
Yeah,
that there's people that have a house like them.
right.
Yeah. I think one of the things we talked about last week is kind of the cross-cultural application of the themes within the book. So, you know, we have, as we've talked about on here, we have a disproportionate number of minority students in our programs. We know that we have a disproportionate number of African-American students who are placed in our programs across the state. And so when we talk about using a book like this, that is a very homogenous, you know, very white-centric, Eurocentric book, all the way through, you have to look for the themes that are emerging that are universal. And so we can have conversations with students who are from different cultural experiences, like urban versus rural in Kentucky. You know, we have most of our students in our, or not most, but the largest percentage of our students in our programs come from Jefferson County, which is a very urban area, and their experience is going to be very different looking than what the experiences are portrayed in this book. And so, but if we focus on those themes, if we can pull those themes out about the importance of family, the importance of place, trauma, drug, alcohol abuse, all of those things that have kind of emerged through here. And then another one that we have touched on, we're going to try to get to a little more, is the importance of music. All of those kinds of things are cross-cultural, and that we can pull those things out. So no matter what group we're talking to or what their experience is, I think there's thematic things here that can be pulled in.
And I think it's good. I agree. I live in Eastern Kentucky still, but yet I teach at a dropout prevention center in Fayette County. And, you know, poverty is poverty, and trauma is trauma, no matter where it happens. And so those themes, I think it's good. I think it will be a good book for me to use to help my urban students understand the trauma that the rural students see, and see the differences and talk about those differences.
Yeah, thank you. I hope so too. I hope that you know, that when we focus on the bigger thematic issues that's woven throughout this, that it has large applicability, right? So I mean, it's not just about students who look like me, who have a similar experience to me. There are things here that cover, I think, cross-cultural things. So I just want us to always kind of keep that in our focus, because we don't want to, we also don't want to pick just a certain book that then cuts other folks out of the experience. And so it'd be very easy to do that from this kind of, you know, our experience coming into this and saying, this is what my experience is. But if we look at that thematic issue, we can draw some other folks into that. So other thoughts about that before I kind of have another that related to our students and how we can use this book with our students. But one of the things that came through here and that we talked about internally is about Easter. And so we know that Easter in this book, one of the things that happen is that Aneth's husband at the time, I think it was husband, I think they were married. Yeah, they were married. When he came looking for her after she had left, right? And so he came to the house and he was like, you know, is Aneth here? I want to see her. I want to talk to her. And she said, no, she's not here yet. She's still on the mountain. And so then we know what happens next, right? So it ends up with a very cold, calculated murder that takes place, multiple murders on the hilltop of where he goes to find her. And so the guilt, I think, that is played out through the book through Easter. And so we then cut to a part where she's in a church and she's having kind of what appears to be, at least to me reading it, kind of an emotional breakdown about her guilt associated with telling him where she was or feeling like that she was somehow responsible, even though I think we know as adults and others that she really was not responsible for that. She's not responsible for somebody else's behavior or what they've done. But we did draw some comparisons there to, I think, to some of what our students feel. And so we have lots of students who come from environments where there is domestic violence, there's emotional and physical abuse that's taking place, both to them and to people that they care about. And oftentimes, I think that some of our students carry with them a guilt as though part of that is their fault, that they are in some way have some responsibility in that. So I'm interested in kind of what your all's thoughts are, that how you draw that parallel between Easter's experience and maybe what our students have experienced and how we can use that in our classes. Or maybe you didn't think that at all, and that's okay.
I see it a lot as, you know, with my boys that I have here right now, if something's not going well at home and they're hearing about it through a phone call or visit, they wear that because they want to be there to help and they can't. And it's just the emotional turmoil that they go through. You can see it on them, the struggle they're dealing with, and wanting to be there for family. And I try to tell them, I said, the best thing you can do for your family is take care of yourself here. For the one less thing, if they know they don't have to worry about you while you're here because you're taking care of your business here, that's going to help them with their other issues that they're dealing with. And it's hard to get them to understand it because that pull of family is so strong that they want to be there. And helping them out and stuff. And if mom's going through something, it's like, you just see it on in their body language and their demeanor, that they're really struggling to want to be there for them and stuff. I know it's not quite the same, but it's that emotional roller coaster that they're on constantly, especially if they get those notes and calls or whatnot that you physically, so you're wearing it like a big old heavy coat. You can see it bringing them down. And we try as we might to try to pick them up out of that. And it's so tough for some of them to understand that I've got to take care of me while I'm here and the issues that I'm dealing with, and that's going to help my family in the long run because I'm taking care of myself.
Yep. I think this is a theme that emerges a lot with kids who kind of live through a divorce of their parents as well, that they oftentimes, and we hear about that kind of in kind of, you know, the psychotherapy kind of issue stuff, is that a lot of kids are dealing with the emotional baggage of a divorce and feeling as though they are somehow responsible for that. If they would have behaved better or if they would have done something differently, then things would have been different for their family. So I think that also, for me, kind of emerges as a theme here, or as something that we need to be aware of as we talk with students.
The thing that came to my mind when I was reading that was, for any of us who worked with students in gangs or, you know, that conglomerate and call themselves gangs, and there's been like a shooting or an accident and they've lost a friend and they were like, well, I couldn't have been there and the outcome would have been different. And they tend to dwell on, had I just been there, things would have been different. That was the one thing that sparked several memories for me when I was reading, as Easter's having, you know, this trauma emerge. I'm thinking of students that I've worked with who've lost family and friends, and, you know, they just keep going back to, had I been there, this is my fault. I chose to do something else. And just how we, you know, talk, as you said, like, it's not your fault. This isn't something that we could have lost you to. So
yeah,
just keeping it very real.
Good point. Yeah. And Amanda over in the comments drew that. It's not just about divorce as the example that I gave, but what if a parent's incarcerated, or that the kid went into foster care and that they take responsibility for them, that being the situation, that if they would have behaved better, or if they wouldn't have done something or whatever, then they wouldn't have been brought into foster care. All of the guilt, I think, that comes with that. Guilt is a very strong kind of, I don't know the right word to use, but I mean, it can be really debilitating I think for a lot of people, the overwhelming sense of guilt that sometimes we feel about things that are beyond our control, that we are not always in charge of everything that's happening, but we like to feel like we could be. I think that's what Sarah is talking about as well, is that we feel as though we could make things different, even though that's not always the case. And then the guilt that comes from that. Other thoughts related to that theme that emerged? All right, so one of the things that we haven't talked about yet really is quilting. So, the whole thing, it's built around kind of loosely, but you have in the background the great Uncle Paul, who is a quilter and who is designing this quilt. And can you guys just talk with me a little bit about kind of the imagery of quilting in this story and kind of how it plays together? Has that kind of emerged for you as kind of illustrative of what's happening in the story?
I think a lot of our students are going to see that as a switch of a gender role. A lot of times they don't think of a man being a quilter or like any kind of sewing. I think that could definitely be a switch that some people could relate to, because they may grow up in a single parent home and they'll see the parent doing kind of the mom and the dad's job sort of. So I think that could be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's also illustrating the way the community is put together and the way the family is put together. They're all attached in some forms, as a quilt piece is attached to certain parts of the quilt, and yet they're not in the same relation or in the same place as other parts of the quilt, but not necessarily attached as relatives. And I thought it was a very good symbolism of the community and how tight knit the community was, and the relationship to each other, and how they all work together to form that family or that unity of community.
Peggy, I think that's kind of where my thoughts went too, is kind of as we talked about the importance of family. And so that, again, as Sherry mentioned, probably the most dominant theme in the book is that connection of family. And I think that the idea of a quilt and the imagery of the quilt, if you step back from it and look at that, of how they're each individual pieces, right? And so they're each has their own individual personality and all of that, but it's connected so seamlessly into something that is very protective, something that's very comforting, something that provides you warmth and shelter and all of those things that are supposed to make you feel good. And so the imagery of that for me really comes together in this book as well. And then while I feel like it's very kind of in the background of the story, I mean, it's not a prominent part of the entire story. It's only mentioned a few times with a few interactions, but it certainly culminates at the end of that with the gift of that quilt back to him. I think that's really important in symbolism there. We have some good folks over in the comments as well. So, like the scraps, using scraps from different things to make quilts, that not everyone's perfect, but it all comes together perfectly. The idea that nothing and no one is a throwaway, that nothing is useless, no one is useless. Everybody comes together, and when we're all together, it creates this beautiful tapestry and something that can provide us with a lot of comfort. Do you guys have any other thoughts related to the idea of the quilting or the presentation of the quilt at the end? So for me, one of the other things that come with the idea of quilting, kind of I see as kind of a branch off from the story, but related to quilting, is the history of quilting, which is not something that we have maybe historically talked about. But I think it could be a very important conversation, or a very easy conversation and lesson to integrate into this. We know that in Kentucky, we have the Quilting Museum in Paducah, right? So some of you have a little more access to that than others. But the idea of quilting and what that represents. And so as we were talking about this, and I'm thinking about quilting and kind of the importance of quilting, we can really look, I think, at the historical perspective of quilting and what quilting played in our history. And so I was a Black Studies minor, for example, in college. And so I studied Black history and African American history and kind of looked at that. And part of the narrative that we learned about was the importance of quilting during the Underground Railroad, for example, and the use of quilts as directional markers within that culture and within that time frame to help folks who were escaping from slavery in the South and who were moving, to the North, and what that looked like with Harriet Tubman and others who used quilting as maps, as road maps for folks, and the history of that. I think that's a very interesting lesson that could be pulled off from this book. So I'd encourage you all that are not maybe as familiar with that to kind of look into that a little bit and see what you can learn and how you can integrate that conversation as well. But there's different styles of quilts, right? And so we know there's the wedding ring quilt. There's like all of these different ideas. And my mom was a quilter and still is. And so she's done hand stitching. She doesn't use machinery or any of that kind of stuff, the new stuff that, the newfangled things that everybody uses, but the old fashioned way. And all of the designs that were used historically in quilting, I think could be a very interesting conversation in our classrooms. And it can also integrate into an art lesson. We can look at historically about, the different designs of quilts and how we can use some tactile learning. We can get our kids integrated with their hands and their hearts and kind of their minds all together and learning how to do the quilting, even if it's using construction paper, if it's doing different designs, and then what the history is of those each design. So I think of again, that Underground Railroad, when we used to, folks would hang out quilts in their backyard to dry. And so some of them had directional arrows built into the quilt. So you had, I don't know the name of the particular design, and some of you all who are quilters might know that a little more. But there's some that have like a triangle that's pointed in different directions. And so when you would hang those outside your house, it would kind of look as a way to direct people on where to go. So if you were, there is help to the right. So we know that when we see that, we're going to move toward the right as we're moving on that Underground Railroad kind of situation. So again, I think that there's a way to have a conversation about the Black history aspects of that. But I think that there's also a way to integrate that into an art lesson while we're also having those conversations, either through the use of actual quilting or through just art design using construction paper, something as simple as construction paper. So I'd encourage you guys to also look at that as an opportunity through this book, that we can have multidisciplinary conversations that have emerged from some of the things that are happening here.
Ronnie, I will never forget going to Ramey East Step. They had received a grant for boys to learn quilting. And when you walked inside that classroom, those young men were so excited to tell you about their quilt, about the pieces of the material that they had, and the significance of each piece of material and how they were putting it together. And I think, because he has a man doing quilting in the story, I just think that shows people it's not just something that women would do. It's anybody can do quilting. And I just will never forget the excitement and the joy of those young men at Ramey East Step doing their quilting. She had gotten a grant, and it was just for boys.
Yeah, that's great. I think it also illustrates that. And I like that it challenges kind of gender stereotypes too, throughout this, about what's appropriate for people to do, or what do we think, that folks do. So I always like that aspect a little bit myself. So there are, let's see, a few other things. Let's see if I want to jump into those. We have a few minutes left. So one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier was the use of music. And so, we've been starting off all of these meetings each week with kind of a playlist from the book. And clearly, as Silas is writing this, and a lot of their experiences in this book is built around music. So you kind of uses that music to illustrate a feeling or kind of what's happening in the moment. So I'm interested in kind of some ideas that you all might have about how you use music, or music is used in your classroom or could be used in your classroom to kind of build this into something that's more relevant, I guess, for today. Is that something that any of you all have done or have ideas about how to do?
We did a playlist. We had our students do their own playlist. We first of all, we had a playlist of the book where people would write down, you know, Lucinda Williams and Charlie Daniels and, you know, on and on. But then we gave our students an opportunity to make their own playlist. And we had some, you know, there's got to be some rules on that one, because that one gets a little dicey sometimes. But I got to tell you, that's one of their favorite things to do, is that they showcase a little bit of their music and some of the things that they like. And that's actually a great one to do with African American studies. You know, this is a great time to kind of incorporate that a little bit. And you can do like pioneers of jazz, or you can do pioneers of, you know, Kentucky, or there's just lots of places to go with that. But I find that the kids immediately, as soon as you talk about music and you tie it to the book and then talk about music that they might like, that's a winner all the way around.
Yeah, I agree. So I think as we were reading this and talking about it, you know, the music just kept coming back, and so many great songs that I related to, you know, that I was like, oh, I love that song. Or I love it. I remember when I was a kid, and I talked about this on here with you, Harper Valley PTA was like, I love that song. It was so funny and just catchy, and just, I mean, so immediately when I'm reading that, it immediately starts playing in my head. It's, you know, it kind of transports you to a particular memory or time. If we had Oak Ridge Boys Elvira in here, I don't know what I would have done. I'd probably, you know, I picture myself in a pickup truck with a camper on it, you know, running down a dirt road. It'd taken me right back to that. But music has a way of really transporting people kind of to an experience or a time, either a great memory or something that's not as great for them. But that integration of how we use that, I think, could be really critical in this.
Hey, give us that Papa Mau Mau real quick.
Papa Mau Wow. My heart's on fire, Elvira. You're welcome.
Pretty good. Pretty
That was
good.
a track in my mama's pickup truck. So, you know, that's how far that goes back. Yeah, it's really good.
And I think with the playlist too, I've done this before of trying to give a little bit of student choice in assignments. I'm just trying to do a little bit of mindfulness and pulling out certain lyrics of songs that the kids listen to, and to show them how those songs are relatable, like what they like about those songs, and really kind of showing, you know, how they relate to a certain song is really interesting as well.
Yep. I agree. I love that that way of making it a very personal learning experience for students. And we all know that, you know, everybody loves music. I mean, kids love music. Our students love music. I mean, they're just, a lot of their emotion and, like, you know, is expressed through music, and they're so creative in a lot of ways. And so anytime we can integrate that and give them ownership in the project, and to give them an opportunity to express what they're feeling and how they're doing that through music, I think does nothing but, you know, it's a win. I mean, it makes it a win. It's an easy win for us to do that. So why wouldn't we? Especially when we are using a text, if we use a text like this, that we can really pull in some of those experiences where it's such a strong theme. So yeah, no, Heather, we agree. You know, are some songs out there that are not age appropriate, or not what we think are age appropriate for our classrooms. And I think that's what David was talking about, is that we have to be, you know, we have to review those. And I mean, you know, there are things that we can allow in our programs and things that we can't, and that's okay. We can put parameters into that as well. But that's part of what we have to do as educators and as kind of that facilitator of the learning, is to guide that, so we can put those things in place to make sure that we have some guidance.
I liked how they used, so music to me was significant when they're talking about Clay, you know, getting in the truck and they're driving to the ocean, and the playlist had been made. And he remembers, you know, she popped in a tape, but he was so traumatized, for lack of better words, that he didn't hear the music. It was just like a dulling sound in the background. but then by being at the ocean and he's healing, and then they get back in the truck and the same tape and the music's back. It's like a symbolism of, healing. And we talk about that a lot here with our kids. What do you listen to when you're sad versus when you're happy? And can you hear the happy music when you're sad? And that was something that stood out to me was, the music was just dull to him.
No, that's a great point, Sarah. I don't think I connected that. That's the beauty, I think, of this book, is that it has so many layers within it that you connect to some things and maybe others you don't. But what a great observation, because that is so true, that when they first got in that truck and they're driving through the Cumberland Gap Parkway down there, and they're going through the tunnel and all of that, and which is imagery that I can immediately kind of relate to, is the music wasn't there, even though it was playing. I mean, he just was disconnected from that had been such a critical theme in every other aspect of his life. So, when everything that was happening to him had kind of a playlist with it. And then this part where it was such a depressing kind of situation for him, the absence of music, I think, speaks just as loud there. So that's a great observation. Thanks for sharing that.
In terms of the healing powers, I thought they were also illustrated, not to the extent that it was with the music, but also with the water, talking about baptism and the healing powers of that, and then going to the ocean at the end and being revitalized or healed with the water.
Yeah. It's beautiful imagery. All right, so this is our last big, group talk. What is anything in the book that you all want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
I want to know what happens with Cake and Dreamer. I'm like, I want to know, is there a sequel? Are we going to have a story about them?
Sarah, you got on here just a little bit late. We started with that.
Okay.
I think the other folks who were on here, we had those same questions of what happened, what's going on with them, and where are they in this book, and what happens next. But yeah, that's the missing link. We can ask Silas that next week. So put that on your list of questions. What happens, at least in his mind as the author?
I really think in this book that it could have been 2 or 3 times longer, because I feel like we were getting not really a day-to-day account in the first couple of first 2 big sections we broke apart, but a pretty continuous, because we got invested in everybody's life for the most part. And then the last half is like great big chunk cut scenes.
Very fast.
Just seeing snippets of it. It's oh, we're pregnant. I wanted to see them going back and telling Easter and them that they're going to be having a baby, and their reaction versus next thing you know, the kids running around at the funeral. I really feel like we missed a lot there at the end, that while maybe not got to the heart of his story, but really would have filled in a lot of the narrative for the other characters that were all involved in this big family, that they were all tied together. I really feel like that last chunk, that there was so much more that could have been in there. And, authors do whatever they do for whatever reason. He may have been like, crap, I'm getting too long. I got to wrap this up, but I really feel like I was kind of let down. I'm like, wait a minute, there's huge things that I wasn't invested the first 7 chapters, like, I could take it or leave it. But then I got invested, in their love story, because that's what it was. It was him and their love story. But I just feel like we missed out on a lot of good stuff that could have enriched the story, not necessarily moved the plot along, but could have enriched the story and resolved the Clay Dreamer issue, along the way. So, because he's out of jail, because he's running around at the funeral playing with the kids. So who knows?
All right, other folks, anything else that we missed in the conversation?
Did you all talk about, and I apologize for hopping on late. I actually had a graduate, so I was working with her, but the correlation that they, Clay did run away for a period of time. And, oftentimes we'll hear our students say, if I could just get out of this situation, things would be better. And we're so used to saying, goodness, it's not good to run away from your problems, but maybe we should frame it as, you know what, maybe take time away and get your, rethink your perspective and then step back into it, as opposed, he didn't run away forever, but he needed to like regain his perspective and really miss the mountains and the hills. But then it was time. I mean, he healed and then it was time to go home. And I
Yeah.
just don't want to, miss that for our students, that it's okay to be away from your family. Sometimes that's a healing part that you need, and then it's okay to step back into that role with a different perspective.
Yeah. There, we touched on that at the beginning about the geographic cure that sometimes we look for to solve our problems. But I think you framed it really well in emphasizing the importance of being able to step back from the things that are happening so that you can have a kind of a more realistic perception or a view of what's taking place, and that you can heal before stepping back in to see what you can do about the situation. And so we talked a little bit about the struggles that our students have with not being there, with thinking that if they can just get somewhere else, if they can change where they are in some way, that it's going to fix everything without addressing the underlying issues that are taking place there. So I think that's a really good way to bring that back full circle. So there are lots of, as we wrap up here, there are lots of missing pieces, I think, for me. And Justin, I think that you talked about that too, but there are things that I just wonder about. Questions that were raised throughout this, that are still there lingering. And maybe we might be able to have some of those conversations with Silas next week. So I guess my challenge to you in the next week, in the next 7 days or so that you are reviewing this book, I want you to go back through the book, look at it, write down kind of what those lingering questions are for you. We've talked about the thematic issues, and I'm sure we'll talk about those more with Silas next week, but especially if I'm left to lead that conversation. If you all don't have questions, then I'm just going to ask the same questions that I've asked you all, and nobody wants to go through that. So please think about what it is that you want to know and be prepared to have a conversation next week. So I think there are, as I said, lots of missing links in here. There's the focus on, for me, I don't know if anybody else noticed this, and I talked to Katie about it this morning. She didn't notice it, but he describes things as silver probably 20 times in the book. I don't know if that stuck out to anybody else, but every time he was given a description of a mountain or a creek or ice, it was always silver. And I was like, well, what does that mean? Is that something? Am I missing something? Is that important, or is it just not? Maybe he just likes that color. But, those are things I want to know. We talk about Cherokee heritage in the book. That's kind of something that runs throughout it. And so I wondered about that as well, especially when we look at Appalachia and kind of the geographic migration of people into Appalachia during that time. I mean, I grew up hearing all the time that our family were all Cherokee. And then I did Ancestry and found out there's no Cherokee there at all. It is all Scottish Irish, and that is what most people are. And so this idea that we have like this Cherokee thing, that we all kind of, or a lot of us connect to. And people even say to me, they're like, oh yeah, you can tell. And I was like, I'm not sure about that. And then this, you do that. And so that emerges. And so those questions come up. But there's a lot of things that are kind of missing for me in there. How did the husband who killed Anna, how did he get to Easter's house if he didn't go over that same mountain? That's like a question. How did he get there if he didn't pass them on that mountain already? Because if there was a better way to go, wouldn't they have taken that road instead of going over that mountain? Things like that I'm just like, they're missing links here. So you guys think about that too and see kind of what's going on there. And we'll come back here next Thursday with Silas House, 10 a.m. Eastern time, and wrap all of this up and answer all of these questions that have emerged here. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and I can't wait to see you all again next week. So thanks for being here, everybody. We'll see you next Thursday.